G'day guys, welcome back to a new episode of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 97, and we do have a lot to talk about today. First of all, we're going to be talking about Jamarra Ugle-Hagan and the news that has recently released about his personal issues and how if he's going to be playing again, a lot of speculation about that. We're also going to be taking a look at some pre-season injuries. There have been some more over the week, and we're also going to be taking a look at every single club and tracking the player who's having the best pre-season so far. So let's not waste any more of your time. Let's roll the intro and get straight into it. And then Rankin from the pocket, don't tell me, Isaac Rankin!
Yeah.
He's just got the license for a brothel.
Well, I think Gather Round's going to be more than just AFL this next season.
It's at the handle at the back, Nick Dacos to get the pies home! He's done it! So guys, as you can tell, my brother isn't here again. He should be back next week. I'm pretty sure of that, 90%. I won't make it definite because I know you guys are here for my brother's content, obviously. But he should be back next week. Anyway, if you do want to become a channel member, as you can see, the layout of the podcast is a little bit different. We are actually streaming the podcast live every single week now. We're live streaming it right now if you're watching this. So if you want to become a channel member, you get a bunch of exclusive perks. Link is down below if you want to check that out. But let's get into the episode. So Jamarra Ugle-Hagan has basically been the talk of the town over the past few days. So it first came to light, I think it was on SEN, where Sam Edmund, I think his name is, pretty sure. He basically came out and said there's a lot of concern about Jamarra. I haven't really seen him much at training through the early parts of the preseason, and there's a lot of concern about if he's going to be ready for round one. Mitch Cleary put out a tweet, I think it was early today, so I'm recording this on Tuesday, and they said there's growing doubt for him to play round one. He continues to miss key preseason sessions. The Bulldogs are expected to provide an update for Ugle-Hagan's personal situation in the coming days. Now, I thought that was going to be all for today. I didn't really think I was going to be able to talk about this today. But the club, the Western Bulldogs, have released a statement. They have said, the Western Bulldogs can confirm that forward Jamarra Ugle-Hagan is currently undertaking flexible training arrangement as he deals with personal issues. With the endorsement of the football program, Jamarra has alternated his training between Mission Whitten Oval and away from the club. The club continues to provide its full support for Jamarra and remains in constant contact with him, his family, and his management. With Jamarra's health and well-being paramount importance, the club requests that privacy be respected during this period. So, obviously, and fair enough, there's not like a lot of news about why he's taking time off. That's not really necessary, in my opinion. I don't think we need to know why he's taking this time off. Hopefully, it's nothing too serious. But at this time, I think we just need to let it be. And to be honest, I don't really think this should have been reported about, to be honest. I don't really think it needed to be. And I feel like the only reason why the Western Bulldogs have come out with a statement is because this got out. So whoever that leaked that, it's not the greatest. So hopefully everything's all good with Jamarra. That's as far as we know at this stage on Tuesday. Hopefully he gets back to full training soon because the Bulldogs will need him this season. Had a really good season last year. He's been improving every single year. So for that case, let's hope he can return soon. But really unfortunate that really this had to come out. I mean, it's not really a story worth... I mean, let's be honest. There's no story here for us to know about because nothing's been given to us. So apparently there's reports of journalists getting this information and then all of a sudden we need to know about it. I don't really think that's needed. I mean, yes, he's a public figure, but I mean, at the end, that doesn't mean that we should know everything about his personal life as well. So if he needs to take time away from the game or from pre-season, I think he should have every right to do that without having to, the club having to make a public statement. But anyway, moving on to more news that came out throughout the week. This is a little bit earlier in the week. The West Coast Eagles off-season, been a bit of an interesting one to say the least. Obviously, right back in October, did a pretty good trade period, pretty good off-season period for them with a lot of players coming in. You got Liam Baker, Jack Graham, and Bo Allen from the draft, a bunch of other players as well. But there's been a couple of controversies over the last couple of weeks. First of all, we had Ruben Jinby, who was caught peeing in public and now has to face court. What a ridiculous story that even needed to come out. Like, I don't even think he should be... I mean, he has to go down to court to face this. I think it's because he gave false information about himself. Don't quote me on that, but which, I mean, probably shouldn't have done that, to be honest, Ruben. Sorry, bro. Probably not the right idea. But, I mean, is it really a bigger deal? I mean, as long as he wasn't doing it in front of a school. I think it was at a music festival. Like, there shouldn't be kids there. So, who gives a fuck, bro? Like, as long as he's not doing it in front of kids, I don't really care. I mean, I'm sure everyone has peed in public at one time or another. Now, granted, probably do it a little bit private area. But, yeah, I mean, I don't really like the standard of people saying, oh, well, he's a person of importance. He's someone who is respected. He needs to be held to a higher standard. I mean, at the end of the day, he's, 21 years old. He's gone to a football festival. He's probably a little bit drunk. Let's just put it out there. Let's just say he was. Or even if he wasn't, like, whatever. He needed to take a piss. The lines at music festivals are huge. So he probably couldn't hold it, had to go pee. So I don't think that's really a big deal. But anyway, I'm sure there's other things that could be like talked about. But one that came out in the last week or so is Liam Ryan. So Liam Ryan's missed a good chunk of the last 2 years of football for the Eagles. They've really needed him up forward, especially with Willie Rioli leaving as well. Hasn't been able to get onto the field with a lot of injury concerns. Now he's being caught on video having a fight. I've got the clip here. I'll play it for you guys on screen, but the Eagles will be investigating the issue with Liam Ryan involved in an altercation. It was a street fight in Fremantle on Wednesday, so he was probably fighting a couple of Fremantle fans, so understandable that he had to get into that fight. He had to show the Fremantle fans who's number one in the state, and I don't really know who won the fight. Well, I guess we watch the fight now. This isn't exactly like... this is not pay-per-view, guys, so you'll be able to see this fight without having to pay for it. I'll try and describe it for you. You've already got it on screen. Guy swung first. Liam Ryan ducked it pretty nicely, I will say. And then basically it's just a bunch of arms thrown. Not many punches connect from the opponent, I will say. He goes to ground. Everyone laughs at the guy who nearly slips to ground. I will say Liam Ryan looks like he's a pretty decent guard up. Goes in pretty hard, and at the end of the day, it's... nothing really happened. I'm going to be honest. Should he be... I don't really know what's going to happen from this. He shouldn't be getting into a fight. That's not even a football standard. That's just... don't get into fucking fights. Guys, if you're going to take anything away from this channel, just don't get into a street fight. I mean, fuck knows what will happen. If your head gets hit into the ground, hit into the concrete, you can fucking die. So don't get into it. Just walk away. A couple of fuckwits may say, oh, you're fucking soft, bro. You're not soft if you walk away from a fight like that, all right? Liam Ryan, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what Andrew McWalter does here if he sets the standard and gives him some, give them a suspension or a fine. We'll see what happens. They may even just sweep it under the rug. Who the fuck knows? But that's not the greatest look. It's a lot. That's somewhat of a situation that needs to be talked about or needs to be condemned. Ruben Jimmy taking a piss in public, I don't think that really matters. I don't think that's newsworthy. But anyway, let's move on. I want to take a look at a couple of injuries that have happened over the preseason. We talked about this last week. There are a couple of injuries already in this preseason, and unfortunately, they just keep on coming. First of all, at Carlton, we've seen one very bad injury, one also to a very important player. Both of these are very important. First, we'll talk about Sam Walsh. Carlton confirmed that he has done a hamstring strain and he will be sidelined for the next month or so from pre-season. It does seem that he will be integrated back into training program in the next 2 weeks, maybe 3. So it's just unfortunate for Sam Walsh, really, because he's missed quite a lot of early parts of seasons and pre-seasons, and at times he's been able to get back, like in 2023. It took him a bit to get into the season, but we saw how good he was in the final series. And last year he did miss a bit of footy in quite a bit of footy in the pre-season. I think he returned a couple of rounds into 2024's campaign, so hopefully he can return soon and be ready for the match simulation games, but just to wait and see on that front. And Nick Newman's the big one. So he's been ruled out for the entirety of 2025 after rupturing his patella tendon at training. This is really unfortunate for the Blues. He's one of the more experienced players back there. I do think they have cover, but the experience that he does bring is a lot, I think, quite important for the Blues, because I think one of their weaker lines is their defense. So really bad news for Nick Newman, really bad news for Carlton. So really interesting to see what happens. We'll see a couple of match sims. We've already talked about Hollands playing off halfback this year. They've already got Sard. So And Nick Haynes as well. Obviously, he's a little bit more of an intercept defender, but we'll see what happens, how they line that up. But really unfortunate there for Nick Newman. On West Coast Eagles, we have Matt Flynn. There's been a lot of good talk about his preseason so far. Obviously missed a lot of 2024 through injury in his first year at the West Coast Eagles. There's a lot of good talk about Matt Flynn, that he's ready to go for 2025. Unfortunately, he did have an early exit from West Coast training, and it seems to be a foot or ankle concern. So for a ruckman, foot to ankle concern isn't great for him. Hopefully he's okay. Not really much other news at this stage about Matt Flynn. Ivan Soldo is still training away from the main group of Port Adelaide. So we saw at the end of last year, he was a third string ruckman, and obviously we saw at the end of the year that he wanted to leave. St Kilda did have a medical with him, and they didn't want to take him. They said, "Whoa, you're contracted to Port Adelaide. We don't want to touch you." So they sent him back. So Soldo's got a lot of work to do to try and get back into that Port Adelaide lineup. So not the greatest sign that he's still in mid-January, not training with the main group, but wait and see. On Adelaide, Nick Murray injured his abdominal area in a preseason match sim game. So hopefully he's okay, because very important defender. Did return last year after an ACL injury, which ruled out a lot of his a lot of games for him. So really doesn't need that. He's one of their more important defenders. And considering the Crows last year had a pretty poor year, their defense really stood up. So hopefully Nick Murray can be there when round one comes around. On Brisbane, a couple of information regarding their rehab group. Oscar McInerney, Henry Smith, and Levi Ashcroft are all progressing well from their off-season shoulder surgeries. Obviously, McInerney missed the grand final. Henry Smith was an emergency for the grand final. Levi Ashcroft, obviously, the draftee. Hopefully McInerney and Ashcroft can be there. And Henry Smith has been talked about as a potential option to replace Joe Danaher. So interesting news on their front. They did, when they were at training, they were wearing yellow fluorescent caps, which means they aren't allowed to be no contact, no tackling drills for them. So hopefully they're okay. A couple of other Brisbane players, Lockie Neal, Eric Hipwood, and Hugh McCluggage. All of them are starting to work well through their injuries that they had towards the end of last year. Lockie Neal starting to run twice a week, and Eric Hipwood's on a modified workload. Hugh McCluggage is also in rehab, so they obviously did start a little bit later, Brisbane, because they made the grand final and won it, so don't want to talk about it. But they will be hopefully all good to go when opening round comes around. And finally, Essendon, Dylan Shield. Looks like he's playing a little bit more of a different role this year at half-back, but not the greatest news. He did come off the ground in the match simulation game through leg soreness, so Dylan Shield, hopefully he's okay. But interesting role for Dylan Shield to play off halfback. I think he's always been a good user, always a good accumulator. So maybe just a watch for Essendon fans. Finally, Darcy Parish. He's still working away from the main group. So kind of in and out of the team last year through injury. Hopefully Parish can return to give some more depth and more midfield help for Zach Merritt. But with that being said, that's pretty much all the injuries and rehab concerns I really had for this episode. But guys, I wanted to take a look at the preseason at every club. So I've been trying to find some information to see what player at every single club is impressing the most this preseason. So I've got one player at every single club at the very least that is impressing the coaches and the team at their club. We're going to start at the Adelaide Crows. Josh Rochelle looks like he's having one of the best preseasons he's had since joining the Crows from the draft. Matthew Nix has been labelled that Josh Rochelle has had one of the best summer preseasons he's ever seen. It seems that he's had an instant response after a disappointing end of 2024. So obviously he did the celebration against Port Adelaide when he pointed at the teeth. I thought it was quite funny, but I understand why people didn't really like it. The Crows then dropped him for the final game of the season in round 24 against the Sydney Swans. And then there were a couple of other senior players that said not so great things about him, which probably wasn't the greatest look. But it does seem that Josh Rochelle has responded very well to these, to the Crows dropping him. And he's had a good preseason so far. So always had the potential, Josh Rochelle. Hopefully this season he can actually live up to some of those expectations. On Brisbane, Kitty Coleman and Lincoln McCarthy seem to starting to get into team drills, signifying their progress in their preseason. So both of them missed, Coleman missed pretty much every single part of the season other than the first half of the opening round. McCarthy missed, I think, for 2/3 of the season through injury. I think it was both of them were ACLs, but both of them progressing very well. Both of them sort of expected to be ready for preseason games. So that would be massive for Brisbane. Kitty Coleman's such an important defender. And Lincoln McCarthy was one of their best players up forward before he got injured last year. So hopefully both of them can return. We already see that they were able to integrate their depth last year, the Lions, and then go win the premiership. So having more depth, they're going to be a massive team. Maybe a little bit slow at the start of the season because of having a couple of extra weeks of off time, because they make the grand final, but watch out for Brisbane. I don't have any concerns about them. At Carlton, Jesse Motlop is the big talking point. So according to a couple of teammates, including George Hewitt, he says that Jesse Motlop is an early standout at preseason training. He thinks that Jesse has had a pretty strong start, a really good preseason last year, but had a few injury hiccups throughout the season, but now he's come back in really good shape. So expecting him to be a standout in the early parts of the year. So they've really needed a small forward to stand up, Carlton. They've had Matt Owies, he's obviously left now. Corey Durden, Lockie Fogarty, never really been able to cement that spot. So maybe Jesse Motlop can finally lock that spot down for the Blues in their forward line, because Mackay and Curnow desperately need help up there. On Collingwood, a couple of players to talk about here. One's Finn McRae. I know a lot of people sit there and go, oh, this again. But Braden Maynard has spoke highly about his impressive performance during the match simulation for Finn McRae. But just wait and see. Who knows? He's been able to show good signs in VFL football, good signs in preseason before, but he's never been able to keep it consistent in the AFL team. So keep an eye on Finn McRae. But one I really want to talk about is Ed Allen. He played 2 games last year, building to play more football. Could be an early starter this year because Tom Mitchell seems that he may be out of the main team. He's been around the mark, Tom Mitchell, but he is a bit older now. Interested to see if they will try and implement some youth through there. Nick Dacos and Braden Maynard have spoke publicly of how impressed they have seen Allen's preseason so far. Collingwood fans, obviously, people are really looking at their experienced players and players like Dan Houston who they brought into the club. But there are a couple of young guys, especially Ed Allen, to keep an eye on. On Essendon, Elijah Stardust is the big talking point at Essendon. He's had a pretty strong performance in the match simulation for the Bombers. Definitely one to keep an eye on. Couple of years in the wilderness, I would say, Elijah Stardust. He never really been able to lock that spot in that midfield group. But I think that there's a little bit of turnover in the Essendon midfield core with Zach Merritt, Jai Caldwell, Sam Durham. Those are the main 3 we saw last year. Like I said, Parrish is a little bit of injury concern from him still. So maybe Sardis could be an option going forward in the midfield for Essendon this year, and maybe playing a little bit of forward as well. But keep an eye on him because he's done pretty well at VFL level, but when he gets to the AFL, he's found a little bit lost. But seems like he's got some good talking points regarding his preseason so far. On Fremantle, we have Matt Johnson. He's looking like he's bulked up quite a bit, showing a lot more growth in his Fremantle training, which is good to see. Seems like maybe he's moving into that role that maybe Nat Fyfe is going to be voiding in the next year or two. But Caleb Sarong has given not only Matt Johnson a rap, but Neil Erasmus. They said he has said that they're both in ridiculous shape. He likes the size of those 2 to 4 year players, and it's absolutely unbelievable. They are getting quite massive now. They're really physical players as well, and they're embracing that side of the game. So Fremantle are a team to watch this year. I've already said that multiple times. They've already showed how good that midfield core is of young players like Young, Brayshaw and Sarong. So if they can bring in players like Johnson, Erasmus, we obviously talked about O'Driscoll on the channel recently. So if those 2 can get going forward, and then the other guys like Young, who had a career best season last year, Brayshaw and Sarong, who are all out stars really in the midfield, they're going to be dangerous this year. And obviously Bolton as well, who can just pinch hit in there and then kick 40 goals in the season if he's good enough. So really high hopes for Fremantle. But one player that has been talked about a lot, he's been in a lot of headlines, is the ruckman in Sean Darcy. He has stunned teammates of how much weight he has lost during the off-season and moving into the pre-season. So dropped quite a few kilos. It's always been seen as the big brute of a ruckman, but I think it's a good sign that he's lost a bit of weight, because with Luke Jackson, he's been seen as quite an aerobic guy, obviously. So if they can bring in a Sean Darcy who can pinch hit forward, but then can play ruck as well, adds a little bit more depth. He can get around the ground a lot more. I think he wouldn't average more than 80% of game time, Sean Darcy. If he can play more game time, that's just more positives for Fremantle, and hopefully he can. On Geelong's side, a little bit hard to see if there's any sort of young guys coming through. However, one name keeps on coming up, which is Connor O'Sullivan. Was drafted in 2023's draft, I believe. Didn't get much of a go last year. Obviously very hard to crack into the Geelong lineup. However, Zach Guthrie has given him a huge rap this offseason. He's been quoted saying he's going really well at being an impactful player for us for the future. He's really pushing the training standards at the moment. So that's really good to see that even though he may not make the team early, there is signs that he could have a really good VFL season. And if you saw last year with Geelong bringing in a couple of younger guys like Dempsey, De Koning obviously was been around for a little bit now, but there's some younger guys coming through and not just relying on the old heads. So that's good to see on the Geelong front. The Gold Coast. Now, Leo Lombard is the big talking point as the young guy for Gold Coast moving into this preseason, obviously the academy pick. But one player that hasn't been talked about a lot, but is setting a lot of good standards so far this preseason, is Connor Buderick. It does seem that he's had a fantastic preseason on the fitness side of things. He's wanted to improve on last year after only managing 8 games of football. So just keep your eye on Connor Buderick. Good defender he's shown in the past. He's had a pretty good season in 2023. Didn't really make it in his first year under Damien Hardwick. So trying to set some better standards for himself. Maybe get some good game time for him. It's going to be hard to crack into that defence this year because you've got the likes of Euland, who had a career best year last year. The Tools, obviously, he's not taking a part of. And then you've got Noble and Rioli back there. So it's going to be tough for spots, but maybe Connor Buderick can sneak in there. Another Connor is Connor Stone for the Giants. So he's been setting some good standards this pre-season. In the trade period last year, there was a lot of talk of Connor Stone potentially moving clubs at the end of the year. There was been some courting by Essendon, but he decided to sign on with the GWS Giants. He wanted to stay, and there's been a lot of talk about him potentially taking over from Harry Perryman's role, but he obviously went to Collingwood. So he's been quoted saying it's not like he's got that spot locked down, but he knows that he's got to go and earn it. And there's been a lot of good talk about him from match simulation, so keep your eye on Connor Stone. The fact that the Giants really wanted to keep him shows that there's a spot for him. So keep your eye on him. On Hawthorn, the big talking point from this preseason is CJ. So Changwath Jaff. I am so sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. But anyway, he's been playing off that halfback role that he's loved on the preseason. He looks great. Definitely want to keep an eye on. Seems like his role's been changed over the last year or so, playing wing, playing halfback. But the big concern for him has been consistency and getting game time because he's been injured quite a lot. So hopefully Jaff can get through and play a lot more footy this year because he's such an exciting player for Hawthorn. Just been able to, especially in 2024, just wasn't able to stay on the field enough. And I think he's going to be such an important player for them this year. So hopefully he can stay on there. Can get some more game time, stay on the field. Now on to Melbourne. The one player I want to take a look at here is the recruit from the Brisbane Lions. Not really talked about a lot, but Harry Sharp. So he wins the 2K time trials every single year when he was at Brisbane. He's gone to Melbourne and he set the same standard, which is great to see. Now, Lockie Hunter obviously retired at the end of the year for Melbourne. So there's a spot on the wing here for Harry Sharp. Couldn't get a spot in Brisbane because they had so many great players, so much depth. We just talked about that. But there's a spot there for Harry Sharp. He's a good runner. He'll run all day. Pretty good, pretty decent user of it as well. I can see this guy starting round 1. Not going to be talked about a lot by a lot of people because he's not a big name recruit. But I do think that there's some growth here for Harry Sharp. Don't know about the haircut. He's got like a bleach. I think it's bleached through the hair. Don't like that. Watch out for him, Melbourne fans, for this season. Now, North Melbourne. There's obviously been a lot of talk about the recruits like Daniel and Parker. There's been a lot of talk about the draftee, O'Sullivan, Whitlock, and, there's been a lot of talk about these guys. And then you got the players that have been around the mark and in the team throughout the last year or so, like Sheasel, Wardlaw. But a guy who hasn't been talked about a lot, but is being talked about a little bit this preseason by North Melbourne, is Ryan Hardiman. So there's been talk from Matt Forrest from, I think it's the Herald Sun. He's came out and said, so far this preseason, Hardiman has impressed and will be fighting for a spot off that half-back line for the opening parts of the season. So keep your eye on Ryan Hardiman. He did play a few games last year for the Roos. There is a lot of spots. There are a lot of people fighting for those half-back spots, though. You got McKercher, who's likely to be getting that spot with Caleb Daniel. So there's a couple of spots there that's going to be hard to fill for halfback. But maybe if Hardman has a good preseason, has a good match sim, has a good Amy Community Series game, maybe there's a spot for him this season. After that, at Port Adelaide, Ollie Wines looking really good so far this preseason. I don't know if he's going to reach the heights of 2021 with his Brownlow year. I think that's a little bit past him now. But it's good to see that he's setting the standards as well, even at his age. And one player that probably a lot of people wouldn't know about, a guy named Christian Mraz. So he's quite a young guy. Got picked up from the draft in the 2024. He's been playing a little bit of match sim on the wing. So keep your eye on him. I don't know if he's going to get much game time. There's a lot of players fighting for spots, youth players for Port Adelaide. You got Josh Sin, Jace Burgoyne, who did play a little bit last year and obviously impressed so much in the semi-final. And then that halfback role is going to be filled by someone. I'm thinking Jace Burgoyne's got that spot locked in first, but there's a couple of guys who want to take over from that spot from Dan Houston as well. So we just have to wait and see who takes that. But keep your eye on Christian Mraz. On Richmond, there's a lot of players to take a look at here. I've got 4. Tyler Sonsi is the first one. Got some midfield time in the match simulations. That's good to see. Also played on the wing. Just keep your eye on him because Tyler Sonsi, he's been in and out of the team for the Tigers the last year or so. Hasn't been able to lock down a spot, but seemingly has a good preseason so far. Caleb Smith. Obviously, a lot of defensive player left, obviously, was Dan Rioli in the off-season, so there is a defensive spot for him. He played in the preseason match sim off halfback, so Caleb Smith, keep your eye out for him. Sam Banks also did the same. Got a few games last year. Sam Banks didn't really light it up, so keep your eye on maybe a Sam Banks type getting that halfback role. Talked about Brown as well, potentially locking that spot down. So a lot of Richmond Richmond players who haven't got a lot of games, a lot of experience fighting for that halfback role for round 1, just to wait and see. But a big one who was impressing a lot of people is Samson Ryan. So Samson Ryan came into the team a couple of years ago, basically when Jack Riewoldt was coming down towards the end of his career. Got some games, big tall guy. Looks like he's bulked up quite a bit. Was rucking up against Nankervis and held his own, so that's really good to see. I doubt that he's going to get much ruck time this year if Nankervis is fit, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays up forward and gets some decent games. I think this guy just needs more game time, more consistency. Give him the first 5 to 10 games of the season. Say, look, you won't be dropped. Just give him some time. See if the goals come. And if they don't, then you revisit that towards the bye. But keep your eye on Samson Ryan. On St Kilda, so Darcy Wilson I've talked about quite a lot. Won the 3K time trial. I think he won it in his first year as well. So really setting the standards. He's really durable. I think he played almost every single game last year. And he's continuing to impress in this preseason for the Saints. So second preseason, I think this guy is going to be massive this year. Keep your eye on Darcy Wilson. But a couple of other players here. Mateus Filippo was everywhere in the A team for the midfield. So Mateus Filippo looks like he's a lock this year in that midfield core for the Saints. So obviously he ended last year in great form. So keep your eye out on him. And then one that hasn't been talked about a lot is Max Hall. So he played well in the A team for the Saints. Played a little bit of midfield, a little bit of forward. So keep your eye out on him. Could be a potential debutant early. On the Swans, Callum Mills looks like he's doing really well so far this preseason. Missed a lot of 2024 through injury that he did in the previous preseason. So he's ran well in the second time trial the Swans did. If you don't know, they did 2 time trials back to back. Cal Mills ran third in the second time trial, showing good fitness signs for him. So hopefully he's good as a Swans fan. And Corey Warner, he ran first in their first run. He looks like he's showing good signs, Corey Warner. Obviously been in the shadows of his brother for quite a long time. He's shown decent forward nous at times, but just hasn't been consistent enough. So maybe this preseason is when Corey Warner can really meet maybe somewhere to his brother's standards. I don't know if he's going to be able to hit those sort of heights, those sort of performances, but he's a different player to Chad Warner. But I think that he's a decent left footer, does well in the VFL. So if he can maybe get that to the AFL stage, I think there's a spot for him as a smaller forward for the Swans. On West Coast, I've got 2 players to take a look at here. First one is Archer Reed. So it does seem that he's impressing quite a few of the West Coast teammates so far. Matt Owies, who recently joined the club, has said in an interview that the players have been impressed by the second-year tool in Archer Reed. He thinks the consensus pick pre-Christmas was Archer Reed as the most impressive. He's been training well. He looks good. He's a big guy and got some good players to learn off of, like Oscar Allen and Jake Waterman. So Matt Flynn now with that injury, I don't know if it's going to keep him out of round one, but Archer Reed definitely a player to keep an eye on. Don't think he played many games last year, if at all. But, big guy. The West Coast, there's a lot of ruck options there. But I don't think they want to use Bailey Williams as a ruckman again. I think they want to play him more forward. So if Matt Flynn is missing round one, wouldn't be surprised if Archer Reed gets a game. The other one I want to talk about is Bo Allen as well. So he was the top draftee for the West Coast Eagles in this year's draft. Last year's draft, sorry. Looks like he's doing really well playing off that halfback role for the West Coast Eagles so far. Looks like he's learning a lot. I am expecting that this guy's going to be debuting round one for the West Coast. So just keep your eye on him. And finally, the Western Bulldogs. Joel Frazier looks like he's playing across of halfback throughout the preseason. He ran well in their 2K time trial, I believe it was. He ran first. So played a couple of games last year, showed some decent signs. But he looks like he's having a really good preseason. So Joel Frazier looks like he may be locking down a spot for the Western Bulldogs. And Riley Sanders was impressive in the match simulation, playing the midfield majority of the time, also kicked a goal. So with a couple of players moving on at the Bulldogs in the last couple of years or so, with Bailey Smith as well, he's not going to be holding that spot out. It was held off a lot in last year from playing in the team. Obviously got Daniel and McRae leaving. So there's a couple of other midfielders that probably would be in front of him at times, aren't in front of him this year. So another good preseason from Riley Sanders. I'm expecting him to get games, and I think he's definitely a part of that midfield core if they want to play him. So good to see on the Western Bulldogs front. But to quickly recap the players who are really impressing so far this preseason at your club. First of all, at the Adelaide Crows is Joshua Shelley. Brisbane is Kitty Coleman and Lincoln McCarthy. At Carlton, Jesse Motlop. Collingwood is Ed Allen. Essendon is Elijah Sardis. Fremantle is Matt Johnson, Neil Erasmus, and Sean Darcy. At Geelong, it's Connor O'Sullivan. Gold Coast, Connor Butterick. GWS, Connor Stone. Hawthorn is Changwath Jath. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Melbourne is Harry Sharp. North Melbourne is Ryan Hardiman. Port Adelaide is Christian Mraz. Richmond is Tyler Sonzi, Samson Ryan, and Sam Banks. St Kilda, Darcy Wilson, Matthias Filippo, Max Hall. Sydney, Corey Warner, and Cal Mills. West Coast is Archer Reed and Bo Allen. And the Bulldogs is Joel Frazier and Riley Sanders. But with that being said, guys, it's not too far away from the match simulation game. So the AFL today have released an article which tells us when the match simulations are going to be in the preseason games, which is good for us. So I'll put this up on screen for the video, but the first game for AFL players you'll see this year is Saturday, February the 15th. It is the Indigenous All-Stars game. Fremantle up against the Indigenous All-Stars at Optus Stadium at 4:30 local, 7:30 Melbourne time. Then the match simulation games. We have Saturday, February the 15th, is Essendon up against the Bulldogs. That's a Saturday afternoon game. Then the Monday at February 17th is Geelong up against Hawthorn down in Geelong. West Coast and Richmond in Perth. Thursday, February the 20th, we have the Gold Coast, Brisbane and Collingwood. That's a round robin or something game. I don't really know how that's going to work out. We'll have to wait and see. But those are playing Thursday, February the 20th. Friday, February the 21st, Swans up against the Giants. That's 10 a.m., so that's pretty early. I won't be able to watch that. And the Crows will play Port Adelaide in Mount Barker on Friday evening, 5:30 time. And then on the weekend of February the 22nd to the 23rd, North Melbourne play Melbourne. Date and time to be confirmed. And Carlton will play St Kilda at Icon Park. Time and date to be confirmed. But that will be on the weekend of February the 22nd or the 23rd. Then on the Tuesday of February the 25th, we get into the Amy Community Series games. So the first one is Tuesday 25th. We have Geelong up against Essendon. Wednesday the 26th, we have Richmond up against Collingwood. Thursday, the 27th, we have Hawthorn up against the Bulldogs and Brisbane up against Adelaide. Friday, February the 28th, we have the Giants up against Carlton and the Gold Coast up against Sydney. Saturday, March the 1st, we have St Kilda up against Port Adelaide and West Coast up against North Melbourne. And on Sunday, March the 2nd, the final pre-season game before we get into the real stuff, March the 2nd, Sunday, Fremantle and Melbourne. So, not really a lot left, guys. We've got basically, under a month, and we finally get to watch some AFL football. First time for 2025. I'm super excited. Can't wait for that. But make sure to let me know down below who you think you're keeping an eye out for this preseason and how excited you are for the football to finally start. But guys, that's basically what I had for this episode of the podcast. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you did enjoy this episode, make sure to leave a like and subscribe over on YouTube. And if you listened on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and make sure to follow so you're notified on the podcast every single week. But again, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you all next week.